Is there anything better than a chocolate chip cookie? Hi, my name is Elizabeth Benteman, and today I'll be teaching you how to make chocolate chip cookies. According to John Mitchown on December 19, 2013, chocolate chip cookies have been around since the 1930s. They first appeared in the 1938 edition of Wakefield's Tried and True cookbook. They've been made in countless variations since then, but they've always remained an American favorite. I came across this particular recipe for these cookies when I was assigned to make a cooking video for my Spanish class about 2 years ago. A member of my group suggested that we use her family recipe and make chocolate chip cookies. Since then, I've made this recipe countless times, and I can assure you that it's the best chocolate chip cookie recipe you'll ever make. I'm going to be teaching you how to make these cookies in 3 simple steps: combining the wet ingredients, adding the dry ingredients, and baking the cookies. We're going to start off with our first step, which is adding the wet ingredients. Before you do anything, you're going to want to turn your oven on to preheat at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. For this step, you will need a stand mixer, a spoon or some sort of other utensil you can use to help incorporate stuff. You'll also need dry measuring cups and measuring spoons. The ingredients you will need for this step are white sugar, brown sugar, shortening, eggs, and vanilla. What you're going to want to do first is combine a cup of brown sugar and a half a cup of white sugar with 1 cup of shortening. You will combine these ingredients using the stand mixer in a process called creaming. According to Christina Oxford on June 15, 2015, creaming is defined as the process of combining a fat and a sugar in such a way that you incorporate as much air as possible, making the dough or batter very light and fluffy in texture once baked. To do this, you'll use the stand mixer on a medium to high speed for a few minutes. You'll know when you're done because it'll appear very light and fluffy. As soon as you have those things combined, it is time to add the rest of the wet ingredients. You want to start by adding 2 eggs. Carefully crack the eggs into the bowl, but don't worry if you get any shell in the bowl, as you can use a piece of the eggshell to scoop whatever you got in the bowl out and dispose of the shells. Once you have your eggs put in, it's time to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Then, use your stand mixer on a medium speed again to combine everything. You'll know it's well combined when everything looks well together and there's no clumps or anything left in it. Now that you have your wet ingredients prepared, it's time for the second step, adding the dry ingredients. When you're adding dry ingredients, it's very important to make sure that you add them 1 part at a time so that they don't billow out of the mixer when you turn it on. So the recipe calls for 2.5 cups of flour, but we'll start by adding just 1 cup of that. When you're measuring flour, you want to get a spoon and your measuring cup and spoon the flour into the measuring cup and then scrape off of the top. This helps to make sure that you're not packing the flour in there and getting way more than you need. Once you've added your cup of flour, you can go ahead and add your other dry ingredients, which will be a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of salt. Then turn your mixer on a very low speed to start with, and you can start moving the speed up as things get more worked together. As soon as everything is combined, you can move on to adding the rest of the flour. You have 1.5 cups remaining of the flour. Add that, and then turn it on using the same process of starting it on a very low speed and then moving the speed up as things get more incorporated. Now that you've added all those ingredients, it's time for the most important one, the chocolate chips. Now, this recipe calls for 1.5 cups of chocolate chips, but you can add as many or as few as you'd like. Add the chocolate chips in there, and then turn the mixer on. You may have to use a high speed to make sure they get fully spread out throughout the dough and you don't just have them all in one part of it. Now we have our dough prepared. Feel free to sample some if you'd like. It's time to move on to our third and final step, baking the cookies. For this step, you'll need 2 to 3 large sheet pans like this, and you'll want to prepare them with some parchment paper or a silicone baking mat like this one to minimize your cleanup time. When putting the cookie dough onto the pan, you're going to want to use about a spoonful of dough for each cookie. I like to use this, which is made specifically for scooping cookie dough, but you can also use a regular spoon. Just try and make sure that you get an even amount of dough for each cookie so that they bake evenly. Once you have them all on your pan, make sure that they're spaced out evenly. If they're too close together, they spread out when they bake, so they'll become more of a cake than cookies. Once they're all on the pan, it's time to put them in the oven. You should place these cookies one pan at a time on the middle rack of the oven, being careful not to burn yourself. You only can do one sheet pan at a time because if you put in too many, it'll affect the baking time and you won't be sure when to take them out. The recipe says that these cookies will take 10 to 12 minutes to bake. You'll know when they're done because they'll appear brown, golden brown, and set around the edges, but they'll still appear soft in the middle. Once they appear as though they're cooked properly, it's time to take them out of the oven and leave them on the sheet pan to cool for a minute or so. Then you can use a spatula and put them onto a cooling rack, allowing them to cool completely before you put them in a container. Now you've made your cookies. We learned how to do this in 3 simple steps: combining the wet ingredients, adding the dry ingredients, and baking the cookies. Some important things to remember about this process are the process of creaming the shortening and sugar together, the process of spooning the flour into the measuring cup to get the appropriate amount, adding only part of the flour at a time so that it incorporates well, and cooking the cookies until they are golden brown around the edges but soft in the middle. Thank you for listening to my speech, and I hope you enjoy the little pieces of heaven that you can make with this recipe.